Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another video. Wanted to do a quick video today on what we might expect severe weather-wise as we head into late April and early May. We're just coming on the heels of our most recent stretch of severe weather, going back to the 17th when we had that activity across eastern Nebraska into western Iowa. Some pretty robust activity there that produced some large hail and tornadoes. Last few days we've been dealing with this kind of sagging frontal zone, particularly on the 18th and 19th, sagging frontal zone across the central and southern plains that produced some pretty significant tornadic activity, especially on the 19th. And then yesterday we had our system finally eject out into the central U.S. and produce some significant severe weather out from the kind of East Texas area all the way up into the Midwest. We're kind of on the heels of that system today. That system is moving out, and we're now going into a kind of a pattern change the next several days, and I wanted to kind of detail that in this video, as well as what we could see beyond just the next few days going into late April and early May. So the SPC outlooks are full of some of those colors right now. Today, again, just the remnants of that system from yesterday moving off to the east as it ejects. A couple of marginal risks there up in the Great Lakes region and down in the southeast. As that activity moves off to the east, very low end, severe weather threat for today is expected. Then we go into this next stretch of severe weather. For Tuesday, tomorrow, SPC has a slight risk level 2 out of 5 from West Texas into western Oklahoma and southwest Kansas, with an all hazards threat on the table, particularly damaging winds and large hail, but there is a very low end tornado risk down in far southeast New Mexico and west and southwest Texas. So this kind of pattern change sets up tomorrow and will persist through the next several days. Marginal risk exists on day 3 up from Nebraska all the way down into West Texas, and this pattern will remain in place through the end of the work week at least. Then beyond that, there is some uncertainty in the model data, but we are seeing some signs as far as what we might expect for kind of the end of this period going into the early May stretch. So let's go ahead and take just a quick look at that. This is what's going on right now at 500 millibars. You see our trough from the system yesterday is ejecting off into the Great Lakes region. There is the axis of that trough, jet streak, rounding the base of that 500 millibar trough. That will continue to move out here off to the northeast and get out of our hair as we go through the day today into tomorrow. Behind that trough, not much going on across the U.S., mostly just broad zonal flow. Zonal means west to east flow out here across much of the U.S. We do see a little bit of a disturbance back in here in the Pacific Ocean right now that will start to make its way inland into Mexico as we go into the next several days. But mainly we're just going to be in this very low amplitude flow pattern, fairly weak flow pattern in the wake of this system that's ejecting off to the northeast today. As far as our moisture goes, just a quick look at our moisture, and you see that our surface low from yesterday's system continues to move off to the northeast into the Great Lakes region. Very small, narrow ribbon of moisture extending up into the Great Lakes region for today's severe threat, with most of the robust moisture confined now to the Gulf Coast states down along the Texas coast. Those yellow colors you see down here, those are our dew points in excess of 72 degrees Fahrenheit. So all that really robust moisture has been pushed off well to the south as the cold front has kind of sagged off to the east and southeast, pushing that moisture off to the east and southeast into the Gulf Coast states and the Gulf. So as we go into the next several days, we are going to start to see a little bit of that moisture return into the southern high and central high plains. Tomorrow, the early stages of that moisture return will be taking place, so not expecting real robust tornadic activity tomorrow because we might just maintain that kind of high base nature to the storms with just the initial stages of that moisture return. But the few days after that look pretty good for kind of some sneaker days perhaps as we go into Wednesday and Thursday as the moisture has some more time to make its way north into the regions of the central and southern high plains. Could see a little bit more robust activity as we go into the middle portion of the week as that moisture starts to return in earnest. So that's setting up what we have going on right now. Let's take a look at the short term using the NAM. So once again, this is at 500 millibars, the 6Z NAM. 12Z NAM not quite in yet in full as I'm recording this video, just after 9 a.m. on Monday here. So here's our trough that is across the Midwest, ejecting into the Great Lakes region today. Once again, that's just going to continue to move off to the east or northeast And behind that, we're not really going to see much in the way of robust troughing, mostly just zonal flow as we go into tomorrow morning. Just zonal flow out here across much of the plains, slightly stronger belt of flow up here across the northern plains associated with this very low amplitude troughing feature. There, not going to be any severe weather associated with that trough, but we do see a little bit of enhanced flow starting to make its way into Mexico there as we go into the morning tomorrow. That continues to make its way off to the north. And we're just going to be entrenched in this very weak, low amplitude flow pattern for the next several days. This is tomorrow evening. Little bit of a disturbance, very weak disturbance making its way across the southern Rockies down into central and northern Mexico there. That may be enough to initiate some storms tomorrow along the dry line ahead of that's going to separate the drier air to the west and that returning moisture to the east. So that dry line will be our initiating boundary. We'll take a look at the moisture here at the surface in a second, but this flow pattern is going to be what we're going to see for the next several days. Just this broad zonal flow with some very subtle disturbances making their way through the flow day by day. And that should be enough to initiate storms, especially with strong surface heating, continued moisture return over the next several days. We should have enough ingredients for storm formation out here on the high plains. And this is really kind of a classic setup for these areas. Eastern Colorado, western Kansas, down into far eastern New Mexico, west Texas. These low amplitude, weak flow days can really be sneaky sometimes, as you have a lot of terrain features out here, including the cap rock of the Texas Panhandle in West Texas. Lots of terrain features out here, and all you need is a little bit of a disturbance to help initiate storms along the dry line, and you can get some pretty impressive activity, some slow-moving structured supercells, and even some tornadic activity if the moisture is good enough. And we're starting to see some signs that that may be the case. So as we go into Wednesday, again, that flow pattern just persists out across much of the U.S. Again, on Wednesday, this is at 7 p.m. Central on Wednesday, continued zonal flow pattern here, not much troughing making its way out across the region. We do see a little bit of a wave back here starting to impinge upon the western U.S. and western Mexico there by Wednesday evening. As we go into the day on Thursday, that looks to start making its way east, and we could see a little bit stronger forcing out here across the central and southern high plains for some slightly more robust activity on Thursday. But overall, the idea is the same. Fairly weak flow with just some subtle embedded disturbances there acting upon that returning moisture ahead of the dry line. Speaking of that moisture, let's go ahead and go down to the surface here. So as you can see, the blues and purples, that's our most robust moisture. That is well off to the east of the plains today, confined to the Texas coastal regions, off into the Gulf Coast states there. That will continue as we go into the day today. We're not going to really start to see robust moisture return until probably late this evening into the overnight hours tomorrow morning. We start to see very slowly going into Tuesday morning. This is 7 a.m. Tuesday. We're starting to see those dew points creep their way back into the southern plains. This is that 60s dew point line right in here. The separation between the blues and greens, that's kind of our 60 dew point line, starting to make its way off to the north, as we're not going to have really robust low-level cyclogenesis, as you would expect in this kind of weaker flow pattern. Not really any robust cyclogenesis to speak of, but we do see those surface winds start to change a little bit. Slightly more northerly flow here on the backside of the cold front, stretching down from the Great Lakes surface low. That switches into more of a southerly component, easterly and southeasterly component as we go into the overnight hours tonight. Those winds now out of the south and southeast by overnight tonight, and that will start pulling that moisture ever so slowly northward. Now again, as we said, for the first day of this low amplitude flow period on Tuesday, not expecting to see really robust moisture return all the way off to the north. That 60s dew point line kind of sits there kind of south of Midland, Odessa, south of I-20 toward the Fort Stockton area. So that might be where the moisture resides for much of the day tomorrow. We may see some weaker moisture make its way up into West Texas going into tomorrow afternoon. I suspect this might be a little bit too low. Let's actually take a look at the NAM coming in as we speak. So on the NAM, we do see a little bit of fairly kind of this hole in the dew points there. That could be, sometimes we do see this in Texas with certain regimes, so that's something to watch. But we do get 50s dew points overall to start creeping up to the north, with northward extent certainly lesser moisture than areas farther south. So that may be a sign that storms may, as we said, be fairly high-based. Temperatures getting up into the 80s, perhaps. You see here We know the NAM is often too cool with the surface temperatures, so temperatures getting up into the 80s, perhaps mid to upper 80s there. So even 85 degrees over a dew point of 55 degrees at most there across West Texas. That's going to lead to large temperature dew point spreads, greater threat for large hail and damaging winds. And eventually it looks like storms may congeal into more of an MCS moving across parts of West Texas, perhaps southwest Kansas into western Oklahoma as we go into the evening hours on Tuesday, with supercell activity, the most robust supercell activity probably confined right along this moisture gradient there, where the 60s dew points reside there, closer to I-20, down toward I-10 and the Mexican border. So that's Tuesday. We get into the day on Wednesday. That moisture continues to make its way off to the north. I'll go back to our 6Z run here, but that moisture continues to make its way off to the north. We have a little bit more of a robust dry line, more robust moisture farther north here, those 60 dew points well up into Kansas. Sharp moisture gradient there. Could be some convection that's influencing that, but there's our dry line down here out across West Texas, far southeast New Mexico, and intersecting what looks to be perhaps a frontal zone here. Looks to be some sort of frontal zone, some sort of gradient there. Could be convectively induced, as we said, but overall, we have a fairly broad warm sector, dry line here across West Texas, with those, again, subtle disturbances making their way through that weak flow pattern. Should be enough to initiate storms going into the middle portion of the week, Wednesday into Thursday. I would suspect that SPC is going to up the severe risk for Wednesday, as we have a lot more moisture to work with, some subtle disturbances making their way through, and this looks like a pretty classic central and southern high plains type day. So same thing going into Thursday. That moisture continues to just kind of sit there, front or moisture gradient just sags there across the Kansas-Oklahoma border region, with that dry line persisting out across West Texas toward the New Mexico-Texas border region there, with plenty of moisture, especially for the higher terrain areas near the Cap Rock. Upper 50s to low 60s dew points there. That is more than enough moisture to allow for a robust severe threat there, especially on Thursday with that slightly more amplified trough coming in, embedded within the overall more weakly forced regime. So that's the next several days here. Just kind of getting an idea of the hazards. Once again, tomorrow, Tuesday, probably a limited northward advance of that moisture across West Texas. So going to be high-based storms. We will have enough deep layer shear for supercells, that those surface winds out of the southeast with weak westerly flow aloft. We certainly will see that veering of the winds with height overall through the deep layer. Not so much strengthening of the winds with height given the weaker flow aloft, but overall veering wind profiles. Very solid instability, 2,400 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. Should see ample heating out there across the dry line, especially as those dew points creep up into the mid 50s, mid to upper 50s or so. But you see that slightly inverted V profile. Assuming temperatures get a little bit warmer than this, we will see those high temperature dew point spreads for more of a large hail and damaging wind risk tomorrow. Damaging wind risk will perhaps allow those storms to congeal into more of an MCS as we go into the evening hours tomorrow. And we should see perhaps a damaging wind threat persist going into the nighttime hours tomorrow night. But overall, very strong instability, deeply mixed boundary layer with strong deep layer shear. You see that effective bulk shear at 36 knots, so more than adequate for organized convection. Plenty of shear for supercells, very straight photographs, another sign for that large hail and damaging wind risk. Tornado risk probably on the low side tomorrow, but in these weakly forced regimes out across West Texas ahead of the dry line, anything can happen, especially near those terrain features out in that area. So that is Tuesday. We go into Wednesday again. The moisture looks to be a little bit more robust, getting up a little bit farther north ahead of the dry line there. So southwest Kansas, as far north perhaps as southwest Nebraska, but southwestern Kansas down along the dry line into West Texas. Just a couple of soundings out in here, out across these regions. So you see there across western Kansas, again, strong instability, deeply mixed boundary layer there, that inverted V profile in the low levels with fairly limited low level shear, adequate deep layer shear. It actually is on the lower side there, but that terrain can help out somewhat there across western Kansas. Down to the south, shear a little bit stronger perhaps, still strong instability, mostly straight line photographs going into Wednesday. But again, those terrain features and a little bit better moisture making its way up toward the Cap Rock. You can never bat an eye at 60s dew points up on the Cap Rock there. That has been known to be fairly prolific for some robust supercell activity, even tornadic supercell activity out in there. So that's Wednesday. Again, mostly a large hail and damaging wind risk, but could see a low-end tornado risk develop, especially with any storm interactions and near those terrain features out here across these areas. And then we go into Thursday, south of that frontal zone, east of the dry line. Looks to be another day where we could see some robust supercell activity. West Texas off to the north, up into the Oklahoma Panhandle region, maybe southern Kansas, depending on where that boundary sets up here. So that is the next several days. Very similar profiles along coming up with those next several days. Some nice chase opportunities for storm chasers there for some slow-moving supercells out in our favorite terrain regions there, western Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas Panhandle, West Texas areas. Great areas for chasing, and should be some great, nice, relaxed storm chasing opportunities with some slow-moving, perhaps well-structured supercells with that large hail and damaging wind risk, perhaps a low-end tornado risk as well near those terrain features. Now let's look beyond the next several days, and we'll go to our ensemble models here. This is the GFS ensemble. We'll take a look at the European model ensemble here in a second. So starting at 500 millibars, once again, this is the ensemble GFS. So this is not just one run of the GFS that you would see if you're pulling up, a model. You go to the GFS. That's the deterministic run of the GFS. This is the ensemble. So the ensemble basically runs the GFS a bunch of different times, and with slightly different initial conditions fed into the model. So that gives us a bunch of different outputs. And then we take an average of those outputs to get the ensemble outputs here. So this is the 500 millibar average of all those ensemble members of the GFS. So as we go forward in time, you see once again the next several days that very weakly forced regime, low amplitude flow pattern, some weak disturbances rotating through the flow. And then as we go into the latter portions of the week, going into the weekend, we start to see some more troughing developing out across the west U.S. So this is basically the April 26th, 27th, 28th time frame. We start to see that low amplitude flow pattern replaced by this nice troughing out here across the western U.S. We go into the later portions of the weekend, and that trough becomes very well entrenched across the western U.S. Nice higher amplitude flow pattern here, a stronger flow aloft, with that exit region sitting right over the plains right in here. So that is going to mean perhaps another uptick in at least synoptically evident severe weather. The next few days are going to be more mesoscale-driven. Again, a dry line, strong heating there, storm interactions, any outflow boundaries left over. Those are going to really dictate the overall robustness of the severe threat. But we have a much more synoptically evident severe threat that looks to take place the later portions of the weekend into early next week. So April 26th, 27th, 28th time frame, this trough starts to move in. And as far as our moisture goes, of course, that's another important ingredient for us with these synoptically evident severe weather events. We have the forcing we need with this trough coming in. Do we have enough moisture? So again, the next several days, that slow northward advance of the moisture there. And then going into the weekend, it looks like we will see that moisture start to make its way up in earnest into the central and even perhaps the northern plains. You see those 60s dew points all the way up into Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma. And keep in mind, this is an ensemble model. So some of the ensemble members, the individual runs, could even have that 60s dew point line up into the Dakotas there. So we're not trying to forecast too much on the specifics as far as location goes of these pertinent features, but overall, the signs are pointing to the fact that we have a trough here coming into the western U.S., acting upon a broad warm sector of returning moisture. That is should start to ring some alarm bells for a synoptically evidenced stretch of severe weather here going late into the weekend, this weekend into early next week. As this moisture continues to return north, we'll continue to see that moisture off through the next several days into early next week. And then beyond that, it's a little bit tough to tell. We go back to our 500 millibar map here. So you see that trough going to be moving in, acting upon that moisture, and then it kind of ejects into the plains. And then behind that, obviously very tough to tell at this kind of a range, but the ensemble members do hint that we might see some sort of ridging developing over the plains. A little bit of troughing out here across the southwest, so that could keep the southern high plains active there with some more mesoscale days. But overall, synoptically evident severe weather events at the tail end of this GFS ensemble run definitely looks to be a little bit on the subdued side for severe weather. But again, we'll just have to wait and see. This range of forecasting, very difficult. We just don't know much about this time frame going into early May. But the GFS ensemble does look to have a little bit of a weaker flow pattern, more ridging over the plains this would suggest more mesoscale type days overall. Just a little bit hard to tell at this point. Let's take a look at the European model ensemble. So this is going to be the 0Z run, so yesterday evening's run. Much of the same next several days, low amplitude flow pattern, and then as we go into the weekend, that trough very much stronger here on the European model than the GFS, but high amplitude feature here, strong flow rounding the base of that trough into the central and southern plains. Ahead of that is our exit region of that trough, placing much of the plains in that favorable region relative to the trough axis for severe weather. We keep going, so that severe weather threat perhaps could persist into the middle portion of next week, depending on how this trough goes forward into the middle portion of next week. We see some troughing continuing in toward the Tuesday, Wednesday timeframe before things kind of flatten out. And as we saw on the GFS, a little bit of ridging here on the tail end of the European model out across the plains, which could shut things down, at least on a broad scale, going into early May. But again, we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. So the European model definitely on board with the GFS. Of course, some differences in the amplitude and intensity of the trough moving in, but overall, both the European model ensemble and the GFS ensemble hinting at troughing impinging upon a broad area of returning moisture. We see here on the European model as we go into the latter portion of the week, that moisture once again returns northward in earnest by late weekend. 50s dew points all the way up into close to the Canadian border, with 60s dew points there up again into Nebraska and southward. Broad warm sector there, very solid moisture gradient there, likely a dry line. So that trough coming in, acting upon this moisture, classic sign for severe weather. Again, kind of the April 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th time frame, perhaps persisting a little bit farther than that, depending on how the trough reacts as it ejects into the U.S. So overall, looking to at another threat for broad, synoptically evident severe weather going toward the end of the month, particularly this weekend into early next week. So that's going to wrap things up for this video. Once again, the next several days, looking at a fairly low amplitude flow pattern with just day after day of dry line activity out here across the central and southern high plains. For Tuesday, tomorrow, slight risk out here across West Texas, up into western Oklahoma, southwest Kansas. Moisture will be returning tomorrow, so mostly just a hail and wind threat with high-based supercells tomorrow ahead of the dry line. Same thing on Wednesday, a little bit better moisture quality, but still should be some slow-moving, perhaps high-based supercells with that hail and wind threat. Could see a low-end tornado risk develop with any storm interactions or terrain interactions out here across this region. Same thing for Thursday. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday look to be pretty much a storm chaser's paradise, slow-moving supercells, with perhaps some structure, hail, wind, and maybe an isolated tornado risk pending those interactions that we talked about. Then as we go further on into the week, we might see a couple days where we slow down a bit before the weekend into early next week. That's when we are expecting to see that robust troughing make its way into the western U.S., acting upon a broad region of enhanced moisture return out across the plains. So the signs are there for an uptick in synoptically evident severe weather. Again, April 26th through about the 29th time frame, perhaps after that. And then going into early May, a little bit tough to tell, but both the GFS and European ensemble show perhaps a quieter period with some slight ridging developing over the plains, but we'll get to that period once we get a little bit better confidence in that. So overall, looks to be a nice stretch here for storm chasing. With some of those slow-moving supercells the next few days out across the central and southern high plains. Then we shift into that more synoptically evident period this weekend into early next week. So looks to be an active stretch continuing here. Our active above average year will continue out for tornadoes. It looks to continue here into the latter portions of April. We're definitely above average, and we don't see any signs of that slowing down here as we go into the latter portion of April into early May. Of course, hazards are not something we can predict with fine scale detail at this point, but overall looks to be severe weather in some sense continuing for the foreseeable future into late April and perhaps early May. So with that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.